Hello and welcome to the NPTEL MOOCs course on Foundation for Virtual and Augmented Reality Systems. We are going to start lecture number 4, where in brief we will talk about the historical evolution of the field. So far we have covered few basic terms, their definitions, to get a broader understanding of what is this field, why it is important, and what are there in the field that are of importance to us to know about. Here what we will do is we will deviate a little bit from discussing the concepts, rather we will quickly have a look at the historical evolution of the field, which I hope will be of interest to all of you, and let us quickly have a look at all the things that shaped the present state of the area of the field. We are going to begin with a quick look at the historical evolution of virtual reality. Separately, we will talk about augmented reality in the later part of the lecture. Now, this evolution of the field we can divide into some distinct phases. Although I have used the term distinct, but sometimes there may be a little bit of overlap between the phases. But mostly we can differentiate key developments which shaped the field in distinct phases mostly, and we can broadly have 4 phases of evolution of this field, starting with a phase that curiously was there even before the advent of digital computers. So, we can call it early era. Then we have formative years, which roughly we can associate with these years between 1950 and 1990. Then we have modern phase between 1991 to 2015, and the growth phase, which is the current phase where we are all in, which roughly we can say that started from 2016 onwards. What we will do is try to get some understanding of these evolutionary phases in terms of the key developments that took place in each of these phases or era. Now, let us talk about the early era. So, whenever I use the term virtual reality, immediately we associate it with some devices that is computer in nature. So, essentially it is difficult for us to basically think of virtual reality without thinking of computers, particularly computer displays. However, you will be surprised to know that the concept in some form was there even before computers were officially developed in the 1940s, before the advent of modern digital computers in the 1940s. So, of course, not everything was there, but a few things conceptually were similar to what we consider to be immersive experience in virtual reality. There are few key developments in this era we can roughly associate with virtual reality experience. The first of those was developed in 1838 by Sir Charles Wheatstone, who demonstrated a device, a stereoscopic device, and established for the first time in recorded history that our brain can process 2D images as 3D objects. So, this can be roughly considered to be the first step towards creation of immersive experience. Remember that when we experience virtual reality, we wear either headsets or experience it through some display devices. Each display device is 2D in nature, but due to our stereoscopic vision, we see these images together in the form of 3D objects, 3D space. That is what immersion is all about, and this demonstration way back in 1838 actually established the fact that this is possible. You can see in the accompanying image the kind of device that was developed at that time. Then in 1860, David Brewster created a compact size stereoscope, similar device, to create illusion of depth in viewing images. So, when we are viewing images, we can perceive depth through that stereoscopic display developed by David Brewster in 1860, which was of course, as you can see, an advent in terms of the earlier invention. This we can roughly consider to be another step to create practical immersive experiences, and the accompanying image shows the kind of device that was developed, early form of stereoscopic displays. In 1928, the concept of a flight simulator was introduced for the first time by Edwin Link, which eventually evolved to present day very sophisticated flight simulators, and these flight simulators are having multiple sensors to give an immersive experience, and this early development in 1928 shown in this accompanying figure can be considered to be a precursor to that multisensory immersive VR experience, which are prevalent in modern times. So, that is all about early era. So, we can have these few inventions, developments associated with early era before the advent of computers. Then once the computer came into the picture in the 1940s, we entered the second phase of the historical evolution of virtual reality. We can call it formative years. Roughly we can associate it the interval between 1950 and 1990 to this formative year phase. Now, in the 1950s, people started working on a new kind of computer displays called HMDs or head mounted displays. Note that at that time regular computer monitors, CRT screens were more common as compared to HMDs, but you can notice here that as early as in 1950s, people started thinking about different types of displays or HMDs. This happened particularly towards the latter half of the decade. Then in 1961, engineers at the Philco Corporation developed one HMD, which was able to track users' motion, much like modern day HMDs. But as you can see in the accompanying figure, how bulky it looked and how difficult it was to wear such a device as a head mounted display. Clearly, the usage was not very comfortable. Users were less likely to find comfort after wearing this device, but it was an early development in the evolution of HMDs. In 1962, Morton Heilig introduced Sensorama, another invention as shown in this figure here in the accompanying figure, which at that time was publicized, having many features like 3D, wide vision, motion, color, stereo sound, even smell, wind, vibration. So, in a sense it tried to engage all our sensory organs through the use of smell, wind, vibrations or haptic, along with the sound and stereo sound and other qualities related to display or our visual sense. We can roughly call this to be the first device of virtual reality as it is defined in the modern days, in the modern times. Why? Because using this, a user can feel vibrations, sound, smell and wind recorded in advance. Essentially, this device was able to stimulate all our sensory organs to give an immersive experience. So, as per the definition of virtual reality, we can call it to be the first such immersive virtual reality system, which was developed way back in 1961. In 1962. Then in 1965, Tom Furness and colleagues at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base worked on visually coupled systems for pilots consisted of HMDs. This is another kind of HMDs named differently, of course, you can see from here. So, the HMD looked something like this as shown in the figure, and that was another development in the overall evolution of head mounted displays. Then in 1967, Evan Sutherland came up with the particular HMD called Sword of Damocles, and you can see here how complicated it looked at that time. Of course, it contained lots of components attached to lots of places in the room, but it was a quite revolutionary invention at that time. In fact, he was the first to demonstrate HMD with head tracking and computer generated imagery. That was quite a novel invention at that time. Then in 1967 itself, Fred Brooks at the University of North Carolina developed a system with haptic feedback. So far, emphasis was primarily given on motion detection or head movement detection. Now, particularly on the input side, output side, of course, Sensorama tried to give some sort of touch sensations, but that was taken further by this invention by Fred Brooks, where haptic feedback was provided, as you can see in the accompanying figure. The user can experience through touch sensation whatever is being shown on the screen, and while manipulating the objects on the screen, the sensation can be felt through touch. So, these type of haptic feedbacks allowed the user to feel objects on the screen. At that time, force feedback device was used. Nowadays, these type of devices are quite common, but at that time it was one of its kind. So, quite novel at that time. In 1973, Kruger used the term artificial reality. Now, this was considered to be the early term for virtual reality. So, nowadays nobody uses this term, but at that time this term was proposed, which eventually evolved to the modern term of virtual reality. That happened in 1973. Then in 1985, another development took place. Scott Fisher and his colleagues at NASA developed first commercially viable stereoscopic head tracked HMD with a wide field of view. They named it Virtual Visual Environment Display, or VIVD. Note that the earlier HMDs that we talked about are quite costly, research prototypes, not commercially available, only few were made, whereas in 1985 this particular development took place, that is first commercially available headset or HMD was developed and launched, which was named as Vived. You can see in the accompanying figure how it looked, and you can, since you have already seen the earlier versions of the HMDs before this 1985 invention, you can now compare their relative complexity. The earlier ones were more complex, difficult to use, whereas this one was relatively less complex. In 1987, two papers appeared in the Scientific American Journal. Now, among them one was on data glove. So, at the end of this lecture, I will give you the references to these papers, and would like to encourage you to go through the papers, the original papers, to see how things were developing at that time, the perspective at that time. Now, as I said, two papers were there in the Scientific American Journal. One of them was on data glove, which is one kind of input devices. We will talk more about that while discussing HR hardware later in this course, while discussing VR hardware later in the course. Now, these two papers actually played important role in shaping the field, making the field popular at that time. Finally, towards the end of these formative years phase, towards the late 1980s, the term virtual reality was proposed by Jaron Lanier, an American, who came up with this term virtual reality at that time, which subsequently, as we all know, is the term used to refer to the immersive technologies. So, the formative years spanning between 1950 and 1990 led to the popularization of the term virtual reality. In the 1950s, it started with development of HMDs, and towards the end of these formative years phase, the term virtual reality became quite popular. Then we entered the modern phase. This phase spanned between, roughly we can associate this phase to the interval 1990 to 2015, about 25 years. Again, we will be talking about the important developments that took place during this phase. In 1992, the cave system was invented at the University of Illinois, Chicago, at the Electronic Visualization Laboratory. Now, there at that time, that system was having a single silicon graphics computer, which rendered images in a surrounding setting that felt like one surrounded by holograms. So, essentially it gave some sort of immersive experience in that cave system. Now, so far we mostly talked about hardware development. During this modern phase, several things happened on the software front as well. In 1992 itself, when that cave system was made, the company Sensate developed the WTK package for higher level application development in VR. So, that is one software package that was developed, which again helped in building such systems. In 1994, VRML or Virtual Reality Modeling Language was presented. Now, after that many modeling languages of VR appeared such as X3D, Java 3D and so on, but all of these started in 1994 in the modern phase with the development of VRML, Virtual Reality Modeling Language. In 2006, Mark Bolas of University of Southern California's MXR lab and Ian McDowell of FakeSpace Labs created an 150-degree FOV field of view HMD called White 5. So, this is another development in the progression of revolution of HMDs. Now, the HMD that was developed at that time in 2006, you can see here in the accompanying figure. If you keep the earlier HMDs side by side starting with late 1950s, whatever was developed at that time, then subsequently Sutherland's HMD and then the NASA HMD and so on, you can see how things are changing, how things had changed at that time. From quite bulky appearance, it became quite portable and less bulky and more usable in a sense. In 2012, very recently, Pamal Laki, who was 19 years old at that time, very young, created an inexpensive VR headset which was called Oculus Rift. Now, this actually spurred interest in VR like anything. Later on, Facebook purchased it in 2014, and with that purchase they tried to popularize it and made things affordable for the masses. And in a sense, this Oculus Rift headset, which you can still see around, still available, although no longer supported much, this became quite popular at that time, and people started having interest in this field because of this inexpensive headsets, availability of inexpensive headsets. And that development, we can say, towards the end of modern phase, spurred the interest in this field to a great extent. Finally, we are going to discuss about the last and continuing phase, that is the growth phase, which roughly we can say started from 2016 onwards. Now, why this 2016? Because in that year many well-known companies released commercial VR headsets which made immersive experience affordable to a large population, which in turn spurred growth of the field. So, Facebook came up with Oculus Rift version 1, then HTC came up with HTC Vive, Sony came up with PlayStation X VR, Microsoft came up with HoloLens. So, all these are quite famous and popular. Some of them are still around and in, of course, latest versions. Then in 2021, Zuckerberg of Meta popularized the term metaverse. This metaverse term was actually there since 1990s. However, at that time it was within the research community, nobody paid much attention to it. But with the use of this term by Zuckerberg, people started taking interest in the meaning of this term, and different people started interpreting it in different way, spurring interest and further activity in the field. Only a couple of years back, 2023, Apple came up with its own VR headset, Apple Vision Pro. So, as these developments show, this type of things are continuing. So, we can say that the story continues, more and more such developments will happen in terms of better headsets or better immersive displays or better input devices and so on. So, from here things can only grow, that is why we are calling this continuing phase as the growth phase. So, the story continues, it will keep on happening, and as we have discussed in the first lecture, since there is going to be huge demand, so all these developments will continue, may even accelerate. So, that is in very brief what are the key developments that shaped this field. So, with that we have come to the end of this part of the lecture. Here we discussed about historical milestones in VR. So, we talked about 4 developmental phase or evolutionary phase. One phase started even before the advent of the digital computer. Few developments there actually relates to the immersive experience. So, we kept it as part of this historical development. Then there are other 3 phases: formative years, modern phase and growth phase. And we have also noted key milestones in each of these phases. In the next lecture we will be talking about, next part of the lecture we will be talking about the history of AR in a similar manner, that is in terms of phases and key milestones. Knowing history is always interesting, of course, and I hope that this brief history of the evolution is of interest to all of you. You liked this discussion. For further details you can refer to this book, and some other references were mentioned which will come at the end of this lecture, that is after we talk about AR history. But this book is available online. You can have a look at this book by Lavelle, where this historical evolution is covered in details. So, with that I would like to conclude this part of the lecture. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed. Happy learning. See you in the next part.